headlines, sorting through the media bias, exposing the propaganda, and challenging you to use your brain. It's time to tap into the truth.
Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed time to tap into the truth. Welcome to today's broadcast, coming to you live once again from historic Roane County, Tennessee. This is your host, Tim Tapp. Today we're going to be talking about more than a couple of means that certain people on the left, not only Democrats within our own country, but also internationalists, obviously so-called progressives from around the world, are now unifying using the UN in an effort to establish and control forms of backdoor gun control. This is not part of the conspiracy corner, ladies and gentlemen. This is the main topic for the day, because this is, while it may qualify as a conspiracy, it is not theory. This is happening. But before we get into that, we're going to touch on a couple of other items first. Number one, I wish I could say this surprised me, but just short news item. Columbia University has now officially hired a cop killer as a professor. For those of you who are not familiar with Kathy Boudin, she is a former member of the Weather Underground. Yes, that same group of domestic terrorists which one of the occupiers' best political teachers, mentors, if you will, happens to have been part of the leadership of. The group that bombed the Pentagon, the group that did a lot of other nasty things that the media doesn't seem to want to pay attention to for some reason. Well, Kathy was a member, and she actually got to spend 22 years in prison for her role in the murder of 2 police officers and a Brinks security guard. After all this, she's now officially a prestigious professor at Columbia University. Well, there's certainly nothing like honoring a despicable cop killer with a position to influence America's youth, is there? Biggest joke of the day, I would put this in the offbeat section if it wasn't meant to be serious. It shows you what a joke it is today. Twitter went abuzz, and I suppose Facebook probably did as well after the news broke. The occupier has decided that he's going to sacrifice along with the rest of all the federal employees, and he's going to give back 5% of his salary to the Treasury. And he's retroactive that to the beginning of the sequester. Wow. 5%. That's really going to make a difference. Really feeling the pain there in comparison to all those furloughed employees, especially the furloughed employees that aren't actually government employees but who are contractor employees who are being furloughed because of loss of cash flow. 5%. For those of you who aren't aware, the President of the United States makes $400,000 a year annually. That puts that 5% that he's going to be giving up at just a little bit under $1,700 a month. Now, for a guy who gets his meals free, who gets his housing free, who gets his travel free, who's taking vacations on the taxpayer dime, who gets almost everything free of charge because the taxpayers are paying for it, wow, he's really going to miss that 5%. As far as I can tell, he's probably done less than 5% of what the job he's currently supposed to be doing requires. So it seems to me if he was going to be making a gesture of relevance that was meaningful to the people, he should be keeping about 5% of it and giving 95% back. Although it'd be all the same to me, since he is individually wealthy, if he gave it all back. After all, we have had presidents, strange how they're mostly conservative Republicans, who have given back all of their money, and there was no fanfare made about it. It wasn't reported in the news. They could afford to do it, and they did. They didn't take the people's money. We've had presidents who have paid for their vacations out of pocket, including paying for the additional security that was required out of their pocket. Why? Because they didn't want the taxpayers burdened. Guess what? That's what makes this such a freaking joke. He thinks it's a PR win. He thinks people are out there that are dumb enough to believe that this means something. Ooh, 5%. Discover card gives you 5% back on annual cash for purchases, for crying out loud. If you can get that from a credit card, how big of a sacrifice do you really think this is? 5%. Is he going to give up any of the additional luxuries that he and the family gets while they're lounging about between their monthly vacations and their late night movie theater runs? Oh, come on. Let me take an opportunity now, also very much in the news and very important, need to be keeping a very close eye on this North Korea situation. I've expressed before my concern. This is the third generation of the beloved leader scenario. Brainwashing throughout all of North Korea. It is hard to imagine that Kim Jong-un has not been influenced by some degree into believing some of this press. The level of threats continue to ratchet up. China has now moved troops and air support close to the North Korean border, and nobody's really sure about that as far as what that means either. Are they moving in to provide support to North Korea in the event that a conflict breaks out? Or is this a way of trying to rattle the chain a little bit and pull the dog back in the yard so they don't get dragged into a conflict they really don't want a part of? Right now, we don't know which, and I'm sure we probably won't find out which. The government, or what we have for elected officials in our government right now, keep telling us it's nothing to be concerned about. But, you know, here's the big question. Is all of this talk of war by North Korea just the kind of posturing that we've heard off and on for 3 different generations of supreme leaders now? I mean, it may be, but with the rhetoric of the kind that is emanating from North Korea for the past couple of weeks now, there's only one thing that's certain, and that's if it comes to war, it will be the worst camouflage sneak attack in history, first of all. Some things to consider regarding Kim Jong-un's threats to annihilate both South Korea and the United States. Number 1, the totalitarian state police the totalitarian police state has nuclear weapons and delivery systems and is already threatening to use them. It has the 4th largest standing military in the world. It has between 500,000 and 700,000 rounds of artillery that it can fire in just a few hours at Seoul. That's the capital of South Korea, for those of you who may not be aware. And it is a major metropolitan capital that was rebuilt from the ground up after being destroyed in the Korean War, where the two sides initially split. North Korea has 600,000 special operation commandos trained to fight an asymmetrical war of sabotage and terrorism. I don't think for a second that all of those folks would be sent into South Korea, by the way. Just something to think about. Japan, Guam, Hawaii, they could be hit by direct assault. The country literally has millions of refugees that it could unleash on the South in an invasion that would make it hard to tell the difference between North Korean victims and the North Korean enemy. It has a national leader that is, well, he's definitely odd enough to entertain Dennis Rodman. So what does that tell you about his mental state? I mean, meanwhile, Washington keeps saying that it's taking all of it seriously. But there are only 30,000 U.S. military personnel in South Korea, not all of which happen to be actual military trained soldiers. We're talking a large number of those are support people. They can fire a gun if they had to, but they're not trained soldiers. They're trained builders, they're technicians, they're mechanics, they're medics. Not all of these 3,000 U.S. military personnel are actual soldiers, and these are the total that will be expected to hold off an attack. While they're armed with anti-missile defense, and U.S. soldiers would be nearly helpless against a massive artillery barrage followed by a full-scale armored invasion. And what if North Korea actually attempts a Red Dawn attack on the U.S., or more likely a series of terrorist attacks? What if it uses one or more of its nuclear weapons to blind the U.S. in an electromagnetic pulse assault? I mean, you've really got to wonder whether the occupier and his administration is up to a challenge of this kind. I mean, with its focus on anti-defense policies, maybe Washington thinks the Department of Homeland Security, with its billions of rounds of ammunition, can handle it. I tend to think that their purpose is a little different than actually protecting the homeland from foreign invasion. I tend to think it's to round up all us rabble-rousing, troublemaking constitutionalists who still believe in personal freedom. But hey, I could be wrong, and maybe that is the plan. So there we go. North Korea may be one of several strategic threats the U.S. faces that cannot be deterred through the doctrine of mutually assured destruction. I mean, that's why Ronald Reagan was determined to build the Strategic Defense Initiative, which, of course, has been left to wane and become a joke to most of the administrations that have taken over since Ronald Reagan left office. And the occupiers administration has demonstrated its willingness to kill American citizens with drone strikes. One wonders why Washington is helpless to do anything about a certifiable loon in charge of a nuclear gulag state. You might wonder what it is that I'm suggesting exactly. Well, at least the recognition that there is a genuine axis of evil in the world that poses a threat to the United States would be a good start. Beyond that, you would have to think someone in Washington would awaken to the need for genuine civil defense measures like America once had during the Cold War. You know, a period of relative stability compared to what we face today. That would include the reintroduction of a civilian shelter system on par with what the Chinese government has prepared for its own population, not just the Washington politicians. That would include halting all blustering about the confiscation of private firearms in the United States. That would include hardening the critical infrastructure against an EMP-style attack, or just as likely a catastrophic solar flare outbreak that could occur at any time. And for heaven's sake, stop all further procurements of arms and ammunition by domestic government agencies, Homeland Security, that are causing critical shortages, not just for American civilians, but for police departments and, believe it or not, even the U.S. military. Now, I don't expect the occupier or anybody in the Obama administration to listen to a single word that I've got